So first of all, what is this keyword? So this keyword is representing the current object in which context your functions are getting executed, or maybe your program is getting executed. So if you are globally, so there is also a global object under which the code is getting executed. If you are inside a function, inside a class, so for that also a object will be there in which context you will be getting executed. So let's see with few examples what exactly this keyword mean. So firstly, let me console this inside my global scope. So I am writing the code here in the global scope and directly executing this to understand what I'm getting in the console. So I'm able to understand I'm getting my window object in which all the details about my window are there. It means my browser here in this case. So I can just write, or I can see in which particular browser I am, what is the screen size and everything for my browser. I'm able to see here. Now, if I say console global this, and let's see what exactly inside this global this as well. So in this case, whatever we are using, the current global scope and the normal this, both are giving us the window object because we are on a top level. So here the global this and this both are exactly equal. Along with this, I also want to verify by consoling the window object. So this is a window object which is exactly similar and to this and the global this. So finally inside the global scope, the window object will be responsible in which will be present in this keyword. So even if you want to verify that, what we can do, we can say if this is equals to window, let's see we are getting true or false. Yes, we are getting true. Okay, so we understood what exactly this keyword means inside our global scope. Let's try to understand this keyword inside a function. So let me write a function here called display, and which is going to perform some operation here. And I don't want parameter, I don't want to make it complicated, and I directly want to execute it. And here I want to console this. Let's see. Yes, so here is on line number 5, we are again getting the global object, that is window, the global this. So when we are writing a function, this function is getting executed inside a global scope. This function is not inside any class. This function is not getting executed in any context of object. It is getting executed in a global context. That's the reason we are getting this with a global scope over here. So let's try to write a function inside an object, and in that case see what exactly this keyword will gives us. So let an object where we are mentioning the name, and I want to create a function called display. That's it. And I should be having some function here with the name display, which is not accepting any parameters, and I just want to console this keyword here. So very first thing here, let me console by calling display method. Sorry, let me just call the display method here. So in this case, what is happening? Is there any meaning of this object? No, because it is an independent global function that I'm directly getting executed. So even though I'm writing any object, there is no meaning for that. So even if I execute now, we should be getting a global this object here. Yes, we are getting that. This is coming from line number 9 over here. Now the same display function I want to call from this object called ob.display. So this time we are executing this display function from our object. We are not executing it directly from globally. We are executing it from our ob object. So in this case, it is very interesting to see what will be inside this line. Yes, so there is no surprise we are getting the current object called OB here for this keyword. So this display function is getting executed inside our object scope. We can say that confidently, and we have proved here. Okay, and if I just change this again, it will go for the normal global scope, we can say. What are the other places where this keyword will be used? Let me just comment this and go back. Let me just go back to the HTML here and here on this hello word itself, what I'll do, I'll just write on click here and I'll just try to write some code here. So I'll say this dot style dot display equals to none. So what I'm trying to do here, I'm using this keyword. So when I'm calling on click, this is an event handler inside the JavaScript and the HTML. Whenever I'm clicking on this particular h1 tag, this on click event is getting fired, and the corresponding handler code we have also written here. So I'm mentioning this here. I'm not taking the name of the h1 tag, or maybe I'm not taking the ID of the h1 tag. I'm directly saying this. So this is representing the h1 element in this case. So it is saying h1 element style display property, we want to change it to none. Let's see in our outcome. Yes, it is getting hidden now. So with this, we have also proved in the event handler, if I'm using this keyword, so it is taking the current element on which the execution we are performing. Let's try to understand the same functionality that we have achieved here with object and the function with arrow function. So let me revert the code that we have written inside the HTML so that it will not hamper any of the functionalities. Yeah, perfect. So let's create an object here again, which will have a name and a display function. And we need a display function here now. So let the name of the function will be display. We are creating a variable because we need to create an arrow function. So we don't need any input for our display function. So that's the reason I'm keeping it empty here. And let's write the code in which I just want to give a console for the this keyword. So it's super simple. We are creating an object inside that one property is available, one method is available, and that method is display, which is just consoling this keyword. Now let's try to call firstly the display one. Okay, so there is no meaning for this object we have created in this case because this is an independent arrow function in a global scope that I'm executing here. So let's execute it. We are getting very interesting error here. Cannot access display or display before initialization on line number 5. This one. It's a very interesting error. I'll just take a pause here so that you can think on it. Yes. So there is some concept called hosting in the JavaScript. With the function hosting, what will happen if you're trying to use any function before its declaration? So what the JavaScript will do, it will move its definition ahead or before its usage with the function hosting. It also happens for the variables, but it is not possible with arrow functions. Why it is not possible with the arrow function? Because this is a function is getting assigned to a variable called display. After that point, this is not a function, it is just simply a variable. If you're using a normal traditional function in this way, for example, so it's perfectly allowed in this case, and even I'll execute the code, it will perfectly work. So even though you are using the display function before its creation, due to the JavaScript hosting behavior, what will happen? It will move its definition ahead in the start itself. But this is not possible when we are using the arrow function. Okay, so what I need to do, I need to remove this and I need to put it over here. Super perfect. Let's come back again. There is no meaning of this object for now. We are creating a global scope arrow function and we are calling it. I just want to see what is that this keyword in this context. On the line number 4, we are getting the global this object. Super perfect, because this is complete independent execution. Now try to execute this display function from our object OB. Okay, let's save the code. Now, previously we have seen when we have written the traditional function, when we are calling the display function with the context of the object. So this keyword belongs to the object from which the execution is happening. But arrow function is not doing like that. Arrow function is not treating this object as a context. For the arrow function, the context will be always global. It will not treat the local context or the local object from which the execution happening. That's the difference between the traditional function, how this keyword is treated there, and in the arrow function, this keyword is treated. Okay, let's understand one more new scenario. So I'm having a function here, for example, test function. And in this particular test function here, I I just want to console, for example, this as usual as we have done. And let's call the test function here and seed. So we are getting the global object, that's the regular functionality. But in this case, now what I'll do, I'll try to create some properties inside this keyword here. So I'll say this dot name and I'll give my name here. So what is going to happen here, in what is the context we are getting, we are executing this. It is creating a new property in that called name. Okay, let's see, is any difference in the outcome we are getting here? No. So right now, this is a global context. We should have a local context if you want to create an object of it and you want a new parameters inside that. So what you can do, so for that you have a special syntax here. So let me just let result one, put this inside the result one, and again call it, and let me put into the result two here. And for now, I'll just comment the execution for result one. And here, before calling this function, I will treat this as a class that you must have seen inside Java or maybe C++ something. So I'm executing this something like a constructor now. So what will happen? This keyword now create a new object context. It will not hold your global object context in this case. And now if I see the outcome, this keyword is creating its new scope, its new object scope inside a new variable or the properties present called name. So with this, we should understand, if you are calling the function with a new keyword, it will give the new scope to it. It will give a new context to it. And this is what happen in background when you do the object creation. You might be experiencing Java or other programming language. Perfect. Let's understand one last concept here. Let me just comment this. Okay, so I'm just creating one more new function called just show. I don't want any parameters for that. Let me console this keyword and call the show. Okay, so ideally this will belong to the global context and we should get that window object. But this is a very risky part to do here, because if you by mistakenly changing anything inside this keyword, if you're by mistakenly changing anything inside this keyword, it means you are hampering the global scope. Your complete program can crash, because the same global scope, under the same global scope, your many other functions and the functionalities are working. Let's say you have changed the screen size here or maybe the theme here from the global scope. It will impact your complete application. So if you want to restrict this behavior, so using the use strict functionality of the JavaScript, we can do that. So if I write here, use strict, and now if I execute, so you can see we are not allowed to go inside a global scope from a function here. And now due to this, I should not be worried. Even if I say this dot something and change any parameters, it will not going to affect my global scope. So these are the improvements in the JavaScript will keep happening to reduce the errors and increase the performance, we can say. Let's talk about one important method called. So when we can call a function normally, what's the need of the call method here? So whenever we are calling a function, we can give certain parameters and it will get executed. And we have seen there is something special called a this keyword, which represent in which context the function is getting executed, or maybe from which object it is getting executed. If you want to change that behavior, so this call method will help you. So it will help you to change the contents present inside the this keyword whenever you're calling a function so that it can have a different context for the execution. Let's see with a practical example where it will be useful in the JavaScript. So very first thing, I'll create a traditional function here by simply on add number one, number two, which will simply console the addition of both. Let me call it. This is a way that we have done till now, and we should get a proper output here 4. That's perfect. We are getting in a normal way. And if I want to do with the call method, so each and every function is an object in the JavaScript that we can prove now here. How? So if I just say dot, so this is exactly behaving like a object. We are trying to get their properties and the methods. So whenever I'm saying this dot, it means object dot. I want to call it. Getting. So with this, we are proving the on add is not only a function, it is internally a function object in the JavaScript, and that's the reason we are able to call a particular method from it. So dot call. So we need to mention here the first of all the this keyword. So the first parameter is specifying under which context the function should get executed. After that, I can give the parameters for my function, that is number one and the number two. So let me give the parameters here. So both should give us exactly the same output. Let me just comment out the previous one now. So again, let me just clarify. The first one is setting up under which context your function execution should happen. So this keyword and 1 and 3 belongs to these two inputs. So let's say I'm having one more third input over here. So I can provide that in this way. So this is the way we can call a function by using a call method given inside the function object. Okay, so in this case, this might not look a great sense like we are using a this keyword, because previously also, if you just console the this keyword here, it will take the global scope. And now also you are passing this keyword, which is also giving you the global scope. But what will be the use case of this when you do it in terms of objects, how it will be helpful, that we will try now. So let me just comment out this functionality. Okay, so this time I'll create a function called display. I need a function called display, and which will take input as a, okay, initially we'll not give any input for that. And I'll just say here log the ID equal to this dot ID and name equals to this dot name. So right now I'm trying to create a function which is just consoling the ID and the name for whatever the object from which context it is getting called. So right now, if we use directly this keyword, it will not make any sense, because here the this keyword represent the global scope. So if you want to prove that, let's see display, and it is not having any parameters here, right? So we'll leave this but completely blank, and let's see what will be the outcome. So of course, we are going to have the undefined and some unexpected values here, because this keyword is belonging to the global scope. In this case, let's also confirm that by consoling this keyword. It's a global window object of the browser. Okay, so now we want to execute this display function in context of any object. So let me just first create an object, object one, And in this object, I'll have an ID 101. I'll have name. Okay. And now what is the object one I have created using this object one context? I want to call display function so that it can print ID and the name. This is an idea we need to follow. So what I can do here, I can say display dot call. And now here I can mention, previously we have mentioned this keyword here, the global scope we have given. But this time, under which particular object scope you want to execute your display function, that you can mention object one. And after that, is there any extra parameters are needed for the display here? No. So there is no need to give the second and third parameter that we have done in the previous case. So let me see the output now. Yes, so we are getting a very perfect output now because the function is getting executed in this object. Let me just create one more object and confirm like we are able to call the same function with different object context. So this is my second object in which again I'm having an ID and the name. And now this time I want to call with the second object context. Can I do that? Let's see. Yes, of course we can give. So with this, we have confirmed if we are creating any function, we can also pass some object scope to it. We can also pass what should be the contents of this keyword under which context it should get executed. And to be more sure, what we can do, we can also console what's the value present inside this keyword. So right now I'm executing the display function with the object context of ob2. So under this keyword, we should get our object ob2 here. Let's confirm. Yes, we are getting it very well. So it is perfectly giving us ID and the name. And also it will have some methods and everything inside this object. Those will also be listed out there. So hope you understood till now how the object, using object, we can give a custom context for the function call using the call method. Now let's also try with the default functionalities to change the behavior by using the call function. So I have an array, for example. In this array, I have some values. Okay, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Some values I'm having inside my array. Now what I want to do on this particular array, I want to just pick up the, for example, odd numbers or maybe the even numbers. So what I will do, I'll simply apply one filter function on top of my array. Yes, very correct. Let me do that. So this is updated array, and on my existing array, I'll apply a filter. After applying a filter, of course, it will give me a function that using which I can write some condition for each and every object, what should happen. So let's say for each and every element, I'm saying modulus 2. Okay. And this is going to apply a filter with that. And let me just console the updated array. Okay. Let's see the outcome now. We are getting 135. So what is the condition I have wrote here? So this is sufficient to get the odd numbers from the array that I am giving. And we are applying a filter. Now let's closely observe what's happening on this line. So this is our array. Okay. After that, we are having a filter function on top of that. And we are not mentioning on which context it should happen. By default, it is taking a context of this array itself. I mean to say, whatever the filter is getting applied, it is getting applied on my array. What if I do in this way? For example, this is a generic array object, and on that, if I say prototype dot filter. So this is a generic filter filter function provided by the array object. If you use that, you also need to mention by using which array I should apply the filter. I should use which array to apply the filter. It is similar to that. If I'm calling the display function, using which object I should follow the execution of this function. In the same way, here array.prototype.filter is a generic function that doesn't know anything, that don't have any array with it. So we need to provide two parameters. One is the array, it means that will become its this keyword. what will be the parameter for this keyword, and second is the function which is having some condition, how should be the comparison or the filtration logic should work. So here we need to pass that. Okay, so we need to mention here filter dot call. Okay, now let's see the output. We are getting an exact similar output now here. And again, not to confuse on anything, what I will do, I'll also prepare one more second version of our output, which is with the previous implementation, so that we can compare what we have done. Okay, let's confirm both output are correct. Super correct. So in the first implementation that we have done on the array, we are applying a filter. So we are having a context for the this keyword when the filter function is getting called in the similar way like display. We are have what will be this keyword in this case? It will be your array on line number 24 when you're calling the filter function, and on each and every element of your array, it is applying some logic, and based upon that filtration is happening. But in this above case, when we are doing array.prototype.filter, it's a generic function. You don't have any idea about on which array I need to perform the things. You don't have any context for the this keyword. So when you're manually making use of the call function, we are passing array. So this array becoming its context, maybe it's this keyword on which the logic should get performed, and we are passing just a simple logic to perform the getting an odd number. So this is how we can change the behavior of existing functions as well. On in JavaScript, on each and every function, you will be finding there will be a dot call method where you can pass some custom context and give the next parameters required for it. Let's also see one more example, which is much similar to inheritance in the classes. So what I'll do, I'll create a function called bank account. And this time, this B, I'll make it capital. There is a small reason for that, just for the convenience of this example, because I want to have this example as a classes. And generally the classes and everything, we create the first letter capital always. That's the reason I'm following this convention. Otherwise, generally all the variables, all the function, we should be using the camel case. Okay, so now if I want to create a bank account, for example, I'll need two parameters. For example, what will be the bank account number, and second will be what will be the name of the person. And here, simply I'll create a new scope using this and say number equal to a number. Okay, this is my first statement. The second statement says that this dot name equal to name. What exactly this function is doing here? It's super simple. This is a function which is creating its own scope, whatever the scope like we are passing to it. Either it could be global, either it could be a local one, and it is creating two new properties in that called number and the name by using the parameters we have given. So this might look similar to a class representation. Yes. So let me just say here now, I want to create the first bank account. So generally we call the function by using like this. Okay, that's super cool. So I can call this function, right? Of course, I can call that. And let me just mention the number 101 and the name here. Okay, but it's very interesting to see what is this keyword here in this case, because it is trying to add new properties in that. So it's important to understand what is this keyword, either it's a global one or creating a local scope, what exactly it is. So let me just console this keyword. Yeah. So in this case, this keyword is a global scope. So writing and adding a new properties, number and the name doesn't make sense here because it is changing the global scope object. For this, we have a special feature in the JavaScript. If I just apply a new keyword here, this will solve the problem. What it will do now, let's see. I'll just console here. Yes. So it is creating a separate new context for you. separate new context, and in that particular context, object context, you are adding the new property called number and the new property called name here. So it's a bank account. Now it's something like a class in Java or C++, C Sharp, and we are having a name and the number, which is an exact similar representation for an object or maybe the classes you can say. So this is how, by using a new keyword, we can create a new context as well. We can also make this example more complicated by applying some inheritance here. Let's try to do. So I'll just remove this keyword and everything just for the sake of understanding for now. I'll create one more account called student bank account, and I'll take three parameters: number, name, and let's say the balance, the third parameter. So this is something like a parent class and the child class, you can consider it. So what I'll do, uh, from my child class, I need to call the superclass constructor, the concept you might be knowing, because we need to fulfill what are the properties are available inside our parent class. So here, what I can do, I can say bank account dot call. And when we are again making use of the call method here, firstly we need to pass under which object context it should get execute. So I'll specify this. Okay, this means whatever the current object scope is available for the student bank account. And here I'll pass the two required things for that. One is number and the name. Okay, after that we are remaining with the balance one. So the balance one will be fulfilled by student bank account. Okay, so now we are ready with the parent class, which is holding two properties in it, which is also capable to accept two parameters in its constructor, we can say. In terms of object-oriented programming, we are also ready with our child class, for example, which is capable of accepting three inputs. And from here, by making use of the call method, we are calling the super function here, or maybe the super class, we can say, and providing the current context. Now, let's try to create the first account for the student bank account. Now, by applying the new keyword, you should understand like we are creating a new object scope now, under which this balance will come, under which this number and the name will come. So when I'm calling a student bank account, I should be passing three parameters. Let me do that. 101, the name of the person, and the balance. Okay, so with this, we have successfully created our student bank account. And let's also console this keyword here to understand how the object is getting created for us. Yes, so we are getting a super good object here in which we are ready with our three properties in it. Now, like a normal object, we can access it. Let's say account one dot number, name, and the balance. Yes. So this is how we can make use of the call method and apply many more functionalities, change the context of the function execution and the object behavior and many more. Let's talk about the apply method inside the JavaScript. So apply is similar to the call one, except the one difference in that. So the difference is we generally pass the arguments a comma separated. So here in apply, we just need to pass it as an array. So let's see with the previous example how we can change the call by using an apply. So we have seen this example earlier. Let me just go through one by one example and how you can replace the call with an apply. So we know this function which is having two numbers as a parameter that we are passing here by using this context, and we are providing this keyword here. If you want to change it to an apply, so instead of call, you can make it apply, but whatever the function arguments you're passing a comma separated, here we just need to pass inside an array. That's only one difference. So it will give you exact similar output. In this case, we should get 4. Let's confirm. Yes, we are getting it. Let's comment out this and navigate to the new example. And we have seen one more example for like we are having one display function and having two different objects, and we are trying to call the display function with different object scopes. So now here we are passing object 2 as a context as a this keyword to the display function by using a call. Now let's make it with apply. So here while making it with apply, there is no more changes are needed because there is no other parameters are needed here because our display function won't accept that. If anything needed in that case, so previously in call we used to say comma and that parameter we used to give, and in this case here we need to make it like this. Although I'm not making use of this number one parameter, this is just an elaboration. Let me just remove that. So it will be super simple. You just need to change this call to apply and no more changes are needed here. And let me just check the output for this. We should get the ID and the name from object 2. Yes, we are getting it, and we are also getting very well the object 2 context here that we can see that we are passing from here. Okay, let's comment out the functionality and let's see one more example. So here we try to change the default functions available, the filter function available previously. So we are using array.prototype call, and there are, if you see, there are two parameters. One is your array as a context, which is replacing this keyword inside the filter function. And second is a parameter, the function you are giving, the arrow function, which is holding some conditional logic to perform the getting odd numbers and it is just verifying the each and every number is odd or not and giving you true and false. So as we have seen, if you want to replace all the parameters which are needed for the filter function should be inside the square brackets. That's it. And now we should also get the similar output. Yes. So you can just compare this here. It's exactly similar to this. What are the inputs are needed for the onAdd function? We are passing it inside the square brackets. This is also an input needed for the filter function. We just need to enclose in a square brackets. So this syntax might looking a bit confusing, but understand it step by step the way we have done so that it will be simple. Let's comment it and figure out the last example. So we have also seen the bank account example here. So this bank account example, like it's a separate function like in class we have created, but here we are not making use of any call or the apply. This is just to understand when making use of the new keyword with a function call, it creates a new scope of the object, and this keyword will be replaced with a new scope of object. Otherwise, it will be a global scope, the window object. Yeah. Here is the best example that we have seen, something like a parent class and the child class scenario. So where we are using the call method. Call method, it is something like a superclass constructor we are calling, and we are passing this as a context, like what is the context student bank account object is holding, and passing the two parameters which are required by the bank account function in this case. So if I want to replace this to an apply, I need to enclose this inside the square brackets. That's it. Now we should be able to get the exact similar output. So this is how there is a slight difference between call and apply, and we can use both interchangeably as per the requirement. When there is a long, like a huge requirement to send some parameters and everything, it's better to have an apply. When there are smaller number of inputs, it's better to go with the normal call. Let's talk about the bind method inside the JavaScript. So firstly, what's the need of the bind method? So we know the function is getting called with some context that depends on what are the contents available inside this keyword. So generally it will be a global scope, or we can pass a custom object to that. These all possibilities are available, and that happens when you're calling it. But if you want to bind a particular function with a particular object before it call itself and keep it that newly created function somewhere and later execute it, so bind will be helpful. So bind, you are attaching an object with a function and keeping it in a variable or maybe any function and later making use or maybe the execution of that function. And generally with apply and call, you immediately give a object and ask a function to get execute with that object context. So let's see how the bind method works. So generally the bind method is return a new version of the function whose this keyword is set to the whatever the object we are passing it. So it won't perform any execution. It is just giving you the new version of the function on which the bind is getting called. It is similar to the function borrowing, we can say. So let me just create an object here to elaborate this example. So I'm just adding some name here, then I want to have a display function in which I just want to console the name by using this dot name. Okay. And if I say here object dot display, it's super good. Everything will be working fine because we are calling the display function which is present inside my object one. And when I'm saying it is present inside my object one, and when we are calling it using an object one, so this keyword, it belongs to the current object in which from which my function is getting called. And that's the reason I'm able to very well get the name here that I'm writing inside the object. So it is using the object from which we are calling it in this case. So let me just console this keyword and also confirm my object. Yes, I'm getting my object very well. The OB1 inside this keyword. So with this, we have confirmed it's not a global object. Okay, so let me create one more object to here and give the name. Okay, now I want to call the display function. I want to call the display function with the context of object 2. So generally how we do it. So we can say dot call, and here we pass the object called ob2, and we do that and it will work perfectly. Let's confirm. Yes, it works perfectly. But now again, if I do again, I need to mention the same way. Every time I need to compulsory keep binding these things, or I need to keep giving the context under which object it should get executed. If you don't want to do that, if you want a separate function for that, if you want to create a separate copy of your function which will be compulsory binded with your object 2, but the function is from the object 1, so you can create a new version of the function by using a bind here. How? So let's say I'm creating a temporary function, or I can say the bind function here, and which function I want to apply the binding on display function. Okay, fine. Using which object I want to bind it, I can pass that object here. Okay, so from now onwards, whenever I will call the bind function, it will execute the display function with the context of ob2 with this single line. Let's confirm that. Yes, I want to execute it again, for example. Yes, so what exactly this bind function is returning us? So this bind function is returning a new copy, a new version of the display function, which is binded to the object 2. And this is what the great magic behind the bind function. Okay, let's try with few more examples and the variations here. So if I say here, I create, let's say, one more third object. I'm creating one more third object here, and it's a already binded one, right? Again, here, I want to bind the third object. And now I want to call bind function. So now my question to you is, if I'm calling the bind function, it's super clear that display function will get called, but it will get executed against the context of object 2 or the object 3 context. That's a question. So I'll just take a pause for a second so that you can think on it. Yes. So let's verify the output. we are able to see the second object is only there for the execution and the second object context is only available. If you want to even confirm that, let's console this keyword and see. We are having only the second object. So what we are understanding, when we do the chaining of the bind operation, when we do the chaining using this bind method, so what are the first binding you are doing, only that will be applicable. What are the next binding you are doing in the chaining, that will not be applicable. So you can only apply the binding on a plain function. You cannot apply a binding on already binded function. So if I want to apply one more new binding on this bind function, I can't do that. I can just do that only once on a fresh function. So with this, we have learned that if you're doing the chaining, only the first binding will work. Let me just remove this complication so that it will be simple. It was just an example. Let's confirm everything is good. Yes. Let's comment out this functionality. Okay. Let's see one more example here. So I want a similar example. This one. Okay. In this particular example, we are having a super simple object one. Inside we are having one property and one method, for example, here. And that we have seen the execution is also very well. Let's also reconfirm it before applying anything new. Everything is good here. Now the problem comes when I'm specifying here, for example, set timeout. Okay, so I want to execute this functionality, let's say after 2 seconds. And here, uh, I want to mention the object one dot display functionality should get called after the 2 seconds. So it's super simple. We are saying that after the 2 seconds, 2000 milliseconds mean 2 seconds, the ob1 dot display function should get called. Now see the syntax very well, very clearly here. We are just passing function as a parameter. We are not executing the function. We are just passing function as a parameter. The execution responsibility is given to the set timeout, which is going to happen after the 2 seconds. So who is performing the execution here? The set timeout. Let's see the output. So we are not getting any output here. And the weird thing that we should see, so if I just console this keyword here, and let's see the outcome. Okay, we need to wait for 2 seconds. Yes, so the weird thing we should able to observe here, we are not getting the object one as a this keyword. Surprisingly, we are getting something our global object, the window object here, when I'm consoling the this keyword, which is a very unexpected behavior. But if you closely observe, as I told you, who is calling the display function? Display function is being called by the set timeout method. OB1 is not calling the display function, and that's the reason whole problem is coming up here. If you want to do that, only the OB1 should be responsible to call the display. So for that, we should not pass this OB1.display as a function as a parameter. We should take the responsibility of the execution. So how we'll do that? Let me comment this functionality. So again, I'll mention here, it will get executed after 2000 seconds. So 2000 milliseconds. And here I'll take the responsibility. OB1 dot display. You can see I'm mentioning opening and the closing rounded brackets here. It means I am taking the responsibility for the execution. I'm not just only passing my function as argument, I'm also taking the responsibility. The OB1 is calling the display. So it means that this keyword will retain its scope in which it is getting executed. Let's see the outcome. Just wait for the 2 seconds. Yes. So we are able to get our object here, which is our the the original the original context for the execution. This is the step one. For example, there is one more. For example, this is the first possible solution. What's the second possible solution here? We can use the binding. So this is the second solution. Let temp function, for example, and what I can do, I can say object1 dot display, it will be compulsory binded to, the object one. Now surprisingly, you might be thinking it's already object one under which the display is there, so why need to again bind it to the object one compulsorily? Because as we have seen, when we are passing this function as an argument, so the execution will be done by someone else. In this case, we have seen the set timeout is doing, so it is giving the global scope of object to it. So you don't want to do that. You want to keep remain the object scope with this function itself. That's the reason we are creating a new version of the display function on which we are compulsory doing a binding with object one. And that is now present inside the temp function. So if I execute the same functionality now, we should not have any problem in this case. So instead of this, I'll call temp function. Let's see the outcome. Wait for 2 seconds. Yes. So with this, we have seen after this binding, the function is remaining it's keeping its own original scope of context with it. So this is how the bind works.